Nobody inside the paddock saw it coming. A single prediction, delivered almost casually by a retired legend, began echoing through racing circles like a distant thunderclap rolling toward the grid. Engineers paused. Team managers exchanged glances. Rival riders pretended not to hear it, even though every syllable hit them with the weight of a warning. It hinted at a future where the championship order could twist sharply. A future where the balance of power no longer belonged to the reigning king of the premier class. A future shaped by a rider whose path to MotoGP had always seemed unconventional, unpredictable, and dangerously explosive. And behind it all was the unmistakable voice of a man who once ruled the sport like a carnival ringmaster with a steel heart. But this wasn't just nostalgia talking. This was something else. Something bigger. Something the paddock had no choice but to take seriously. Because when a prediction like this comes from him, it rarely ends quietly. Behind the hospitality units and polished garage doors, teams were preparing for a season unlike anything they'd seen in years. Transfers, internal politics, and aggressive technical development had pushed every factory into a state of restless urgency. Ducati held the upper hand, but their dominance felt more fragile than ever. That tension created space, the kind of space where a single statement from a respected figure could reshape expectations. And that's exactly what happened. The retired icon placed a spotlight on a rider who wasn't even in the MotoGP field yet, a rider whose talent in another championship had become the stuff of late-night paddock debate. His braking performance defied logic, his aggression was the talk of data analysts, and his ability to bend a motorcycle to his will made even elite riders uneasy. He didn't come from the usual paths. He didn't rise through the expected channels. But he carried something raw, something that felt like the start of a new era if the stars aligned. And the moment that prediction reached the ears of certain team managers, whispers began spreading like wildfire. Whispers that something or someone was coming. But those whispers weren't the surprising part. It was the name attached to them that stunned everyone. For years, his domination in another championship had painted him as a showman, an entertainer, a master of last-second braking. But beneath the theatrics was a razor-sharp competitor forged in relentless battles that pushed him to redefine limits most riders never approached. His style wasn't sculpted to be smooth, it was carved to be decisive. Late braking deep into corners. Motorcycle control that bordered on impossible. A connection between rider and machine that analysts struggled to quantify. And when rumors emerged of him being linked to the new V4 development program, eyebrows shot up across the paddock. He wasn't the type to transition quietly. He wasn't the type to adapt slowly. He was the type who walked into unfamiliar territory and made it his stage. But adapting his riding to a V4 prototype wouldn't be trivial. The engine behavior, the torque curve, the aero load, the rear-wheel traction, none of it matched what he dominated with before. Yet insiders insisted he carried something more important than technical alignment. He carried fearlessness. And courage in MotoGP is more than a personality trait. It's a currency, a weapon. Still, the question wasn't whether he had raw talent. The real question, the one keeping engineers awake, was whether that fearlessness could translate into the one arena where the reigning champion carved his legacy with surgical consistency. And that question became even sharper when pressure started building inside the red garage. While one factory was whispering about future possibilities, the reigning champion faced a season beginning with shadows where confidence once lived. From the outside, everything appeared calm. Inside, it was anything but. The synergy between rider and machine, once a seamless partnership, began showing small cracks. Not catastrophic, not dramatic, but just enough to create tension the moment data didn't match expectations. Even more unsettling was the arrival of a formidable teammate who brought with him a reputation for rewriting history. This wasn't a normal garage-mate pairing. It was a collision of two identities that neither the engineers nor the hierarchy could fully control. Pressure began building in silence. Expectations tightened. Every lap, every debrief, every glance toward the other side of the garage carried weight. The reigning champion had always thrived on precision. But precision can slip when the environment begins shifting beneath your feet. And for the first time in years, his place at the top didn't feel untouchable. It felt vulnerable. And vulnerability in MotoGP is the spark that ignites challengers. But as uncertainty crept into the red camp, something even more intriguing emerged elsewhere deep in the shadows of early prototype development. Something that would change the conversation entirely. Prototype tests are normally quiet affairs, controlled, guarded, carefully shielded from prying eyes. But this one became impossible to hide. Because someone inside the program leaked a small detail. A detail big enough to send ripples through every engineering department in the paddock. The new V4 test program wasn't just progressing. It was accelerating. And at the center of it was the rider whose name had been circling the paddock like a storm cloud. His first laps weren't spectacular on paper, but data doesn't always capture the truth of a transformation underway. During early runs, engineers noticed peculiar behavior in the braking phases, slight but unusual patterns suggesting a riding style that could extract something different from the V4's geometry. Something unexpected, something potentially decisive. He wasn't fighting the bike. He was deciphering it. The test team observed adjustments that shouldn't have come naturally to someone transitioning from a completely different machine architecture. Yet he adapted as if he had been preparing for this for years. Still, it was one particular data line, a corner entry profile, that forced engineers to gather in a quiet room, staring at telemetry like they were witnessing a secret unfolding. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. But it carried the signature of a rider who might unlock the V4 platform in a way nobody predicted. And when analysts compared the numbers to the reigning champion's historical strengths, their expressions changed. Because if the trend continued, it pointed toward something that could reshape the competitive order. Yet even that wasn't the most explosive part. What happened next overshadowed everything. Whispers spread faster than official announcements ever could. Rumors claimed that an unusual synergy was forming between rider and prototype. Some insiders insisted he had discovered a natural advantage. Others suggested it might have been a disputed situation based on specific test components. Nothing was confirmed. Nothing needed to be. Speculation became fuel. Some believed the electronics mapping paired perfectly with his high-commitment braking. Others insisted it was the chassis geometry reacting uniquely to his weight distribution. A few even suggested the aero profile gave him stability where most riders struggled. None of the explanations fully satisfied the paddock. But something was clear. Whatever happened during those tests was enough to make established riders uneasy. And when the retired icon added a brief, almost playful comment during an interview, something hinting at potential belief and momentum, the narrative ignited. Suddenly, the possibility wasn't fringe anymore. It was real. It was tangible. And then came the moment that changed everything. A single lap, logged in silence away from crowds, where the stopwatch revealed something that engineers immediately locked behind closed doors. Nobody would release the number publicly. But insiders whispered that it was a lap good enough to alter expectations. A lap that hinted at the unimaginable. Yet even that wasn't the true turning point. It was the reaction from the reigning champion that made this story shift from rumor to threat. The leak found its way onto social media before sunrise. Not the lap times, never the lap times, but the implication. Commentators started theorizing. Fans began drawing comparisons. Rival teams studied trends that weren't even official. Inside the reigning champion's garage, the atmosphere thickened. He didn't express frustration openly. He didn't need to. His silence during the next media session said enough. His team launched quiet internal meetings, adjusting development priorities, shifting focus toward areas that suddenly mattered more. Aero packages were reconsidered. Electronics updates were shuffled, tire strategies reevaluated. Because when a potential challenger emerges from outside the grid, it disrupts more than race strategy. It disrupts psychology. And the reigning champion, usually composed, usually unshakable, now carried the weight of an unfamiliar pressure. Not fear, not panic, just a shadow of uncertainty. The kind that forces a rider to question everything when the visor goes down. But as the season approached and data continued to shift, a deeper question emerged that left no one comfortable. What if this wasn't a one-off? What if the prototype evolution accelerated faster than expected? What if the newcomer arrived not as a wildcard, But as a contender, those questions lingered as teams finalized preparations. Yet there was one final twist. One final development that reframed the entire story. The prediction from the retired icon had done more than stir excitement. It had shaken confidence, moved strategies, and changed how teams evaluated their rivals. Factories began quietly preparing contingency plans. Talent scouts redrew their long-term charts. Engineers pushed prototypes harder, searching for marginal gains that no longer felt optional. Because if the newcomer's adaptation continued on its current trajectory, he wouldn't arrive as an experiment. He would arrive as a disruptor. And disruption is the last thing the reigning champion needed in a season already defined by internal pressure and a shifting garage dynamic. The potential for a new rivalry, one built not on history but on pure competitive contrast, lit the paddock with speculation. A new era felt closer than ever. One shaped by contrasting philosophies, distinct riding identities, and a V4 project that could either resurrect a factory or ignite a multi-year arms race. But just as analysts prepared to settle into predictions, something else surfaced. A quiet note. A cryptic message passed discreetly between two engineers during a late-night meeting. Its contents weren't shared publicly. Its meaning wasn't confirmed. But one line was leaked just enough to create a new wave of uncertainty. We might be ahead of schedule. And just like that, the story changed again. Because in MotoGP, being ahead of schedule doesn't just shift expectations. It reshapes destiny. And the paddock understood something they hadn't realized until now. The storm wasn't coming. It had already arrived.